infrastructure,
Mm.
it remained a relatively small project. But the interesting thing is, the amateur radio people got quite excited because
Mm.
they used amateur radio equipment to communicate to the satellite. And they were also interested in building satellites.
Okay.
So, though, so they said, we will go and build it. And
Mm.
therefore, there was excitement in some parts of the system. There was no excitement in some parts of the system.
Yeah. Mm. Mm.
But the big thing that is likely to happen is when technology advances to the extent that your cell phone would be able to do satellite communication.
Ah.
And that is not far away. There are small companies around the world working on that. So we do expect another wave of interest in
I
that
see.
kind of thing.
So I think there was already around mid 80s or early 90s, there was Inmarsat, which could send signals directly to a not a cell phone but a suitcase-sized communication device.
Yeah, there have been satellite phones,
Yeah.
but typically such phones cost $1,000,
Right.
and
Mm.
they're all very tightly controlled because in the hands of a terrorist,
Mm. Mm.
it is could be a problem. So the usually communications people don't like to
Mm.
encourage too many satellite-based phones.
Mm. Mm.
Direct satellite-based phones are not commercially viable.
Mm. Mm.
But the truth is, we can work in technology in such a
Mm.
way
Mm.
that you might have a phone in your pocket which talks to a satellite,
Mm.
but it is subject to appropriate. Uh, what is the word I would like to use?
Authentication,
Hmm?
validation, appropriate validation, uh,
Monitoring, particularly
monitoring.
monitoring.
Mm.
So you can't misuse it.
Correct. Mm.
Like
Mm.
for instance, if your cell phone talks only to a nearby cell phone operator,
Mm.
suppose your call originates on your cell phone but ends in a BSNL network or
Mm.
in Airtel network or Geo network, then there are standard methods for monitoring these calls to
Right.
make sure where they come from, where they go, and etc. etc. Then the security related people are not very much worried. So technology will have to advance to that level
Right.
that we give the security people their confidence
Yeah.
that this cannot be misused.
True. Yeah. Very true. So I think one of the early efforts in satellite communication and cell phone was Iridium, Motorola's Iridium project, right? Um, More than they ran into monetary issues. They couldn't drum up enough resources to put up 66 satellites and keep refreshing the satellites. Apart from that, did you see any technical issues happening there?
You see, there is nothing really uh, purely technical in the communication world.
Okay.
Communication world is always concerned with regulation, with
Yeah.
monitoring,
Mm.
and the commercial world.
Mm.
It works only when commercial interests are significantly there.
Mm.
Now, Iridium, for a variety of reasons, did not work.
Mm.
Did not work for very long, even though many satellite telephone operators have bought Iridium satellites
Yeah.
and
Mm.
are using them. Now, what is likely to happen is, in future there are other companies which are using technologies similar to
Iridium.
Iridium,
Mm.
and they are likely to be successful
Mm.
because what they will do is make it a part of the commercial cell phone infrastructure
Ah.
and worry about regulation monitoring, etc., etc.,
mm,
then the technology will become more easily available.
mm, mm, mm. No, well said. I think, but are you saying Iridium failed because they did not probably take enough care about protocols, I mean, communication protocols and monitoring and stuff like that?
I have not I have not studied the Iridium system very much.
Mm,
So I can't confidently say what were the reasons why Iridium did not take off. But surely you can be sure there were monitoring issues,
mm,
there were commercial issues. You see, let's face it, communication, you cannot easily get a communication service in India from somebody who is working outside.
right,
They have to, Indian government has control over Indian territory.
right, right.
Similarly, Iridium, if it dreams to be worldwide
Mm,
service provider, they will have to deal with every country and its regulatory apparatus.
ah,
So there is a big complexity there. And
right.
the amount of communications revenue that they could have got
Mm,
was not very much.
right, right.
Because wherever, if you're in the city of Bombay,
Mm,
you are not worried about satellite communication.
mm,
Cellular infrastructure is good
mm,
in Bombay. And therefore, revenue is small, complexities are many, and you are subject to very tight international regulation.
mm-hmm.
There are complexities.
True,
That
very true.
is, hmm.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very good insight, into what can happen to a communication project. So around, I think, ERNet became successful, and thanks to you, we all got to use it. And perhaps ERNet came to Bangalore, ISC, I think, in early 90s, 90 or 91. And uh, in the next 4 years, 95, uh, between 90 and 91, I remember, logging into bulletin board services. Bangalore had a bulletin board service, and Bombay had a bulletin board service. So we used to go relay, the Bangalore bulletin board service would in turn connect one day to Bombay, one day to Delhi. It was a amazing time. And we were told that if you hang around after 12 o'clock midnight, you will get to, somebody will hook you to internet. So we would all wait, and it would never happen for us, for whatever reasons. Maybe we were not in the inner coterie. uh, but uh, what were you thinking between that time, between 90s and 95? What was your thought process? How would internet evolve in India?
uh, one of the most exciting things that happened to the internet and the internet in India was the role of Mr. Vittal.
Yeah.
Mr. Vittal became the Secretary Department of Electronics.
Mm.
And the internet governance largely was handled at the Department of Electronics by one senior officer named Ramakrishnan.
Mm-hmm.
Ramakrishnan is an IIT Madras graduate,
Mm-hmm.
and he was given the bulk of the administrative responsibilities for
Okay.
Internet project,
Mm.
handling the money, distributing it,
Mm.
etc. And he also brought interesting technical interest of his own.
Okay.
So he hired some people who were technically good, and he was getting things done. And he and I sort of, at that time, Internet management still was largely handled. The pure technical management of the Internet was largely being handled by National Center for Software Technology.
Okay.
Uh, so he and I were facing the day-to-day problems. And one of that was, you got very interesting calls from very senior people. And within government and outside government, saying, hey, why don't you give me an internet account, email account?
Okay.
Everybody needed it. And the software industry, like for instance, an example comes to my mind. A new company at that time was Persistence. And if you looked at LinkedIn, you will find an article by the entrepreneur who had started Persistence.
Deshpande?
Deshpande.
Yeah, Anand Deshpande.
Anand Deshpande. I have not read his article yet, but I got a mail from LinkedIn saying Anand Deshpande is writing a paper, writing an article, and he mentions your name.
Okay.
So I'm waiting to read that LinkedIn article and read. Why was this important? Because Anand Deshpande was a startup entrepreneur. And this was several years before 1995, when finally TCP/IP1, BSNL, which did not want to deal with TCP/IP, decided it had to deal with TCP/IP, and it became a legal thing. And in 1995, BSNL made internet available commercially. But before that, in 1990, if Anand Deshpande needed for his startup company email, it was not available. So he would drop in at NCST and say, hey, can you guys give me an email address? We used our own common sense and gave him email address. And this we don't do it for one software company and deny it to another software company. So uniformly we gave it to the software companies.
Okay.
But again, we did not know whether it was legal or illegal. Technically, it was illegal. So we went to Mr. Vittal. Ramakrishnan and I called on him. Said, sir, we have a problem. We have government money being spent on internet, which is for education and research. But there is this budding industry called software industry. And they badly need this technology more than anybody else. And we have been informally giving the connection. But tomorrow, if we land in trouble, we will come to you.
Okay.
But Vittal was a very unusual person. And bold. He will decide and act on what he thinks is right. Plus, he had the authority. He said, you don't worry about this. Go and give the Indian software industry email accounts. We have no problem with that. If anybody bothers you tomorrow, I will go to the cabinet secretary.
Okay.
I will tell him that the Indian software industry cannot work without. And this gave us an enormous strength. The whole Indian software industry for 5 years was dependent on our email services.
Okay.
And we had the authority of the Secretary Government of India, who was going to become chairman, Telecom Commission.
Yes.
And who had the authority of the cabinet secretary to support the software industry. And he did amazing things. He said, I will set up a company called Software of India. The software parks will have the buy special equipment and they bought satellite equipment
Mm.
and had international connectivity, and
Mm.
they will give connectivity to our software industry, and they
Mm.
will work in multiple cities. And he went ahead with all this.
Yeah.
So, what was this in answer to?
So this was, you know, I asked you what was your thought process between 1990 and 95, you know, during that short period when internet was not legalized and yet people were wanting to access internet.
Yeah.
So that's brilliant. In fact, I had a short stint at the beginning of my career in STPI,
Huh?
in Software Technology Parks of India.
Huh.
I worked there in my one of my first jobs was with the Software Technology Parks of India. So I have some sweet memories from there in Bangalore.
And
So
there were
yeah,
very exciting moments
yeah.
when Mr. Vittal's style of management
Mm-hmm.
did amazing things. One day he was in Bangalore. I was also in Bangalore. And he was visiting Texas Instruments,
Mm-hmm.
which was one of the earliest software developers from
Yes.
abroad to work in India. He
Mm-hmm.
said, Ramani, why don't you come with me? I said, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Went with him. And there, the Texas Instruments senior officer who was in charge had a big complaint to Vittal,
Mm-hmm.
saying, there are some rules prescribed to us which don't make sense to me at all, and we are suffering. What was that, says Vittal? And in order to monitor that nothing illegal happens on the communication link, they have said everything that goes on that link should be printed, and a printed copy should be kept available for inspection.
Oh.
And this is 64 kilobit line
Mm.
in those days. And
Mm.
very soon it became faster lines. 64 kilobit line, if you print, you need huge big rooms to
Mm.
store. And they're storing, tons of paper.
Oh God. Mm.
And nobody is going to read through tons of paper in order to check what is there in it.
Mm.
Vittel had this, and he used to have a small dictaphone. He,
Dictaphone. Yeah.
he pulled
Mm.
out the dictaphone and said, Texas Instrument has required to print all the course of their high-speed line on paper and keep it. And nobody has the time to read it. This should be stopped right away. And he put the
Oh.
dictaphone in it.
Okay. Mm. Mm.
So this is technology has its own problems when it is introduced into a country.
Very true. Very true.
So Vittel's dictaphone did a lot for this country.
Yeah. I'm told. I've seen Vittal using that, and I'm told he would go and give it to his secretary, who would transcribe it, and many of his directives would become orders next day. Yeah. Mm. Very true. So yeah, I mean, we were blessed to have leaders like Vittal. It's an amazing thing that happened in those years. Um,
But
so
he was also at the heart of another big revolution.
that
Vittel
is
was appointed.
the CEC.
Before that, he was appointed as chairman Telecom Commission.
Oh yes.
And at that time, he had a major responsibility. What was that? Privatize telecom.
Telecom.
Privatization of telecom was one of the big revolutions of our lives.
True.
In those days, there were 3 million telephones.
Mm.
And when I applied for a telephone in 1973,
Mm.
I waited for 1 year for the telephone to be installed.
Mm.
Now, today, there are 1 billion phones.
Yeah.
And if you go to any old shop
Mm.
and you pay 25 rupees, they give you
Yeah. Connection.
a SIM.
SIM. Yeah. Right.
So Privatization, let's not forget, is
Yeah,
also an important thing.
yeah. So
You-
1995, I remember 1995, right? New telecom policy was, uh, announced, and everything changed from there. Yeah. So you sort of uh, primarily you were concerned with building infrastructure, so to speak. Uh, in, you know, though you were probably interested in the electronics behind it or the software that would be required behind it, but you were building, or you were concerned about building the right infrastructure to take these things around. Am I right in saying that?
uh, I won't say that because it is sort of limiting. The
Okay.
reality is, we were doing whatever we thought was important to do.
Ah.
And that took us left to the left and right and various places. For
Mm.
instance, one of the things we were concerned about was know-how.
Mm.
India needed tens of thousands of software engineers,
Engineers.
and many of them had to understand using networks.
Mm.
So we put a lot of energy and effort into education,
Mm.
part-time education, people who are
Mm.
already in the industry, people
Mm.
with different backgrounds, senior people who were bankers, who were railway officers, who were etc. etc. We dealt with thousands of people,
Yeah.
and educating them not only about software but also about networking and so on and so on. Very soon I was getting invited by banks to go and give lectures to them.
Mm.
How a bank can set up a network. And very soon they also started asking us to be consultants.
Okay. Mm.
And we said, this is so important, we are not going to be individual consultants.
Mm.
We are going to be consultants on behalf of NCST.
Mm.
The whole of NCST is available to do consulting for you. And instead of depending upon the government completely, we will earn a fair amount of our expenses in NCST by doing consulting.
Right. Mm.
And therefore, we did a fair amount of work for the Indian financial industry.
Mm.
Several banks, stock exchanges, we started working for them.
Mm.
And we did it in two ways. Their officers would come to our courses and we will educate them. We
Mm.
set up special courses which
Mm.
were 1 week long and 2 week long, and they could come and learn the overview that a manager had to have.
Mm.
And then we were also consultants to the bank. Then the Reserve Bank of India was having the Rangarajan committee.
Rangarajan. Yeah.
There were two Rangarajan committees,
Mm.
and they oversaw a lot of the computer revolution that came into the
Mm.
banking industry. Now, Dr. Rangarajan was kind enough to appoint me as the chairman of the uh, working committee on technology.
Okay.
And we fed into the larger committee, which he chaired.
Mm.
And at the lower level, the nitty-gritty, the details of the uh, computer technology and network technology, our committee dealt with.
Okay.
So I had the pleasure of working at the with the governor of the Reserve Bank and meeting him,
Mm.
and with Mr. Malhotra, and later with Rangarajan and so on.
Mm.
So similarly, the oil industry came and said, "Hey, you want to set up our own network?" So we acted as consultants to the oil industry and
Mm.
set up an oil network for India.
Mm.
So taking out the technology to the industry,
Mm.
making the industry aware of the possibilities and giving them a helping hand, and training their managers. These were things we were doing in addition to our mainstream education. The mainstream education trained a fairly large percentage of the people. Uh, my memory says at that time we calculated about 1/3 of the people who went with good background in education in the computer area into the software industry came from our courses.
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah.
that is because the universities took time to start computer courses. I think the first degree course in computers came only around 70s or maybe late 60s.
Okay.
But one university here, one university there, and so on. The later thing we saw of 100 engineering colleges teaching BE computer science, that was to come much later.
Yeah.
And today, most engineering colleges survive only on the computer related courses.
That's right.
In those days, this was not there.
Yeah. So you sort of pioneered computer education, so to speak. And you and
that
go
is
ahead,
too
sir.
strong a word. I wouldn't like to use those words. Yeah, we did
Okay.
our bit.
Okay. So I'll tone it down. You started computer education in India. So there was one more company, and I've seen you mentioning about this company in some of your interviews, CMC. Yeah, and amazing work CMC has done in those days. And do can you say something about the founder of CMC? He seems to be a amazing guy by himself because he took risks. I read somewhere about you narrating how he invested money to procure was it a PDP 11 or PDP 10 for PTI, and you started a project for PTI, right? So can you talk about some of your memories there?
Yeah, you see, P.P. Gupta, Prem Prakash Gupta,
Yeah.
had a PhD from London, and I think it was Imperial College of Technology, but I am not 100% sure at the moment. He came to India. He, among other things, he worked for CDC, and it was our fortune at TIFR that CDC, we had bought the India's first CDC.
Oh.
There was a job in India for a CDC manager, mainly because we bought that computer.
Okay.
And P.P. Gupta came as a country manager for CDC.
Oh.
So we got to know him fairly early. And he was a half academic with the PhD degree and very development oriented. And his philosophy itself was quite different. And on one occasion, he told me personally, and that I will never forget. We were talking about computers and what they could do in India. He said, look, we might have a computer on the some umpteenth floor of the Air India building, printing salary bills, printing salary sheets for some oil company.